What about Georgia?
Joining us now from Atlanta.
Atlanta!
Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California.
Maxine,
oh my gosh.
Maxine. I can say Maxine.
We're so excited to have you on this
You let me down so terribly, Maxine. I went to Donald Trump's speech, and I was sitting next to Elijah, and I kept looking. I go, where's Maxine? Where's Maxine?
Where was Maxine?
And Elijah said, well, Maxine thought that it might be best if she just stay home tonight.
Yeah.
I'll see you next time.
That's true.
How you doing?
I missed you. They told me you asked about me. How you doing, Mika? How you doing, Joe?
Okay.
No, I wasn't at the inauguration speech, and I've not been at any of the ceremonial activities with this president.
Yeah, and the reason why wasn't a sign of disrespect. From what I heard, you said that you wanted to be respectful and that you might get a little emotional and might shout something out.
No. It's not that. It's just that I don't honor him. I don't respect this president. I don't think that he deserves to be president of this great country. I am very concerned about him, and I really think he's dangerous. And Joe, I don't know if you've seen the 6-part series that the LA Times wrote about him. It is scathing. I've never seen editorials like this before in my life. And so, you know, we continue to talk about him as if this is normal. Mika, this is abnormal, what we're experiencing with this president. And I have taken him on, as you know, and the millennials have joined me. And so I continue to talk about his ties to Russia and what I think all of that means. And as you know, I've continued to talk about, I believe, that if we have the credible investigations, that it will lead to his impeachment.
So let me ask you this, Maxine. Elijah Cummings says that if he can find common ground with the president, he'll work with him. In fact, he's been talking to the president about reducing prescription drug prices and making pharmaceutical companies actually negotiate with the government. Would you be willing, if you found common ground with the president on issues like that, to work with him?
Well, I don't know how you find common ground with someone you absolutely do not trust. I started to watch him very closely during the campaign season, and when he mimicked and mocked a disabled journalist, I had never seen anything like that before. I thought it was the most outrageous thing for someone running for the president of the United States of America, a mature, grown man, to do that. And of course, when we heard about how he talked about women, grabbing them by their private parts, et cetera, and the way that he simply makes allegations and charges. For example, he said China was currency manipulators. And then the next day or so, he decided after meeting with President Xi, oh no, they're not currency manipulators. He does that from time to time. He goes on and on with challenging, charging, and then when he changes his mind, then it's not true anymore.
Right.
I don't trust him. I don't think I can work with him. As a matter of fact, I'm so worried about what his connections are with Putin and the Kremlin and those oligarchs in Russia. I'm so worried about Tillerson and whether or not Tillerson is there mainly to help get these sanctions lifted so that Trump and all of his allies and friends who are all around him involved in oil and gas and wanting these sanctions lifted. I'm so concerned that that's their main goal. And this is what they want to do to continue to enrich themselves. And so I don't trust him. I'm not going to be able to work with him. I'm going to really press getting these investigations done to find out who he really is and what this is all about. If we're able to connect the dots, if we're able to absolutely get the facts that show that there was collusion with his campaign and with this president and Russia, then he deserves to be impeached. And I think a lot of people who are standing with him will have to move away from him.
Maxine, are there other members of Congress who are taking such a hard line like you?
Well, I want you to know that most members of Congress are not involved in the investigations and, you know, doing their own research and following up on leads. I am. We hope that the intelligence committees will do that, but I don't really have any faith in the House Intelligence Committee because Nunes, as you know, has just discredited himself in the way that he's handled himself. And even though he's talking about recusal, he's still going to be sitting on that committee. I have more faith in the Senate committee because I think John McCain and Lindsey Graham really have, you know, to repay him for the way that they were treated during the campaign. John McCain was dismissed as not being credible, talked about, well, the president said he didn't even like prisoners of war. Well, you know, John McCain is an icon. He's someone that's highly respected. And I disagree with him on a lot of issues, but I really respect the fact that he was a prisoner of war who suffered, you know, under, you know, 7 years or so. And so I don't think he's forgotten how he was treated.
Congresswoman Casey Hunt, you say you don't want to work with the president at all.
No.
Congress has to raise the debt ceiling. That's going to be something of a crisis point here. You have voted in the past to raise the debt ceiling. Will you vote this time to raise the debt ceiling?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. Our government must function, and we must function in ways that absolutely make sense.
So you don't view that as cooperating with the president?
No, I don't. I see that as a consistent way by which I support our government and the work that we have to do.
Congressman Donnie Deutsch, and I've always been a fan of yours, and nobody's been more outspoken than Trump than I am, but I just want to push back a little bit as somebody who kind of worries about the Democratic Party. I get concerned when a member of the House comes up. The reality is he is our president, and if he's impeached, but for today and tomorrow and the next day, I don't know if you're acting in the best interest of your constituents, of the Democratic Party, coming out and saying, look, we all know the history of the grabbing of the genitalia and everything that happened in campaign, but we are now a reality. He is our president. He is our commander-in-chief, and things have to get done in this country. And to me, I don't want to hear a member of my party just say, there's no way I'm working with him on anything. I don't think that's good for the party, and I don't think that's good for the country, and I just don't think that's living in reality.
Well, of course, maybe you are not as offended as some of us are.
I'm very offended, but there's a reality. He's our president.
No, but the reality is there are those of you who keep talking about he's going to pivot and he's going to become presidential. When is that going to happen? Just the other day with Bill O'Reilly, he stood up for him. When Bill O'Reilly had been shown to have made settlements of over $13 million.
You're right about all these things, but he's sitting in that office, and you are a member of Congress that has to work, whether it's voting against or whatever it is, but just to say, to deny he's our president and I'm not doing any business with him, I don't think is in the best interest of your constituents.
Well, I do think it's in the best interest of my constituents. I think he's dangerous. I think he's not a credible leader of this country. I think he's treated our allies badly. I think others from across the sea, across the waters, are looking at us and saying, what's wrong with us? With the man who treats his allies this badly, with the man who changes his mind from day to day, with the man who often does not know what he's talking about. He cannot be trusted, and even though you may think it's not in the best interest of my constituents, I think it's in the best interest of my constituents to get rid of him.
Congresswoman Waters, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this morning. How is your posture toward President Trump different than the posture than, say, Mitch McConnell took toward Barack Obama, that you all criticized so much when he said our goal is to make President Obama a one-term president? Aren't there issues where you could work with Donald Trump, veterans benefits, things like that? In other words, just saying flatly, I won't work with this president, doesn't that preclude you from doing some good things for good people in America?
No, it does not. I don't know what this president means when he talks about any of these issues. When he alludes to, you know, wanting to repair the infrastructure and invest in the infrastructure, there is no program to do that. I don't know what he's talking about. When he talks about tax reform, he's not credible. He's not shown his own tax returns. How can he be the leader talking about tax reform and trying to make Americans believe that somehow that he is going to do the right thing by the average citizen? Here's a man that many of us don't believe have actually paid his taxes. He showed us a 2005 tax return and tried to make us believe that this would be consistent with what he's been doing. He's lied about being under audit, and we've gone through the last day of this tax season, and he still is refusing to show his tax returns. No, I don't feel comfortable working with him. And the American people increasingly are going to see that he doesn't live up to his promises. Something is terribly wrong with this president, and we can't treat it as normal.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, thank you very much.
You're
Good to have
welcome.
you back on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.